say multi-day discussion, it takes longer than one day to discuss how we get from where we are now to where we're going. It takes longer than one day to discuss that. So, and by where we are now, I mean how we're relying completely on the FBI and other agencies to do our protection of kids in schools, and how in Broward County, Florida, they failed in an epic way. So I want to go into audio clip number 4, and then from there, we can kind of discuss this a little bit more. You heard that coming in at the top of the hour. The father of the school shooting victim, he says it's not about guns today, it's about safety in our schools. And he was so eloquent. He torched the interviewer on this interview on the Today Show. So let's get a little bit more of that in number 4.
We could get together on school safety, but when you polarize it, this event and every other media, we don't care about gun control right now. That's a big issue in the country, and you're not going to get everyone together on it. But we're going to get everyone together on fixing our schools. And I just listened to you. So I just listened to you. You didn't mention one question to Governor Scott about what are we going to do about the security for our children? How are we going to do that? But you're just talking about gun control, which is going to just give you more ratings than every other media event. My daughter said, I want to know, our kids are going to school in Kentucky on Monday. How are those kids safe? How about bringing that up to the media? How about bringing that up to Governor Scott? Not about guns. It's not about guns now. Today, it's not about guns. It's about the safety in our schools. And that's what you ask Governor Scott about, and I got to listen to that at my house. My kid's not here because the schools weren't safe. That's the main thing. You go into a courthouse, the judge is safe. The stenographer is not worried someone's coming in with a gun because they can't get in with a gun. The American people, we just want our schools safe. We don't want to talk about guns right now.
And he's right. I mean, is that who we are? So we have a huge tragedy, and the answer is to make it about guns. The answer is to make it about the inanimate object. People can use anything to kill other people, and people have. I mean, Timothy McVeigh used a truck full of explosives, and he blew up not just adults at the Alfred P. Murrah Center, the federal center there, but he also blew up a daycare center that was on the premises. So that changed the way things were being looked at and how security procedures were implemented. And it's absolutely true. Every time we've seen something happen on aircraft or somewhere else, we've said, look, we want something different to be done here. And in schools, we've not yet taken that to its full conclusion. And I think that's because parents are relying on the government to make those choices for them. So I want to go into this story. It's not a story. It's my observation of something that happened during this basketball tournament. And the reason I'm sharing this story with you is because I think it really highlights how we as parents, we kind of abdicate our command and control over to other adults. And we are almost paralyzed by that act. We allow other adults, when we give them authority over our kids, to have the ultimate say in how our kids are treated or how they're taken care of. And so just bear with me here, because this is a part of this conversation. And as we were driving back from Indianapolis to St. Louis, and I just kept going back to this story. So this is what happened. Our oldest daughter is on a basketball team, a homeschool Christian basketball team. Okay. So the tournament that she attended was a Christian tournament. So I'm not saying it was like, there wasn't church there or anything, but all of the teams that were playing there were affiliated with a Christian school or Christian homeschool environment. So that's the setting. Now, you know how we can get about sports. We have all been there. Someone smacks your kid in the face on the basketball court. You're up on your feet yelling. We all get that. But it's the coaches that are a little bit different. So what I observed on 2 separate games while we were there, and remember, it's a basketball arena with multiple basketball courts and multiple teams playing at the same time. It's loud. The kids have made these improvised bucket drums. They're doing their thing. And we see behind us, the team directly behind us, their bench is right behind the bleachers we're sitting on as we're watching the game. The first night we were there, and the coach is screaming and yelling at the girls. He's even using some profanity. He's going out onto the basketball court while the game is in session, which you can get ejected from the game for doing that. The refs weren't calling it. And he was just, I mean, he threw his hat onto the basketball court. He threw his neck badge on there. He threw down a little rag that he was holding. He was losing his temper and he was out of control. Now, why is this important? Hold on. So that was the first night. Second night, we didn't play anywhere near that team. We didn't see him. Third day, we play that team. So you know how it is. You win, you lose, you move through the bracket. You meet up with whatever team won and lost and meets up with you on the bracket. So we meet up with their team. So this is the final game of the actual tournament. And we're playing for, you know, obviously it's one place and the next place. And that's the end. That's the last game you're going to get to play. So he begins to play, or the teams begin to play. He begins his classic, just like he was the first night. He's throwing things. He's mad. I can't tell if he's cursing, but he's yelling at the girls on his team. At one point, the game was really close, like within 3 points. It was really that way the whole game. But at this point, you know, there's 1 quarter left. One of the girls misses a pass. There's a turnover. He calls a timeout. And as they come off of the basketball court, this coach grabs this girl by the arm and puts his face right in her face. Now, y'all know I'm 6'2" tall. I actually stood next to this man after the game. We were walking out. He was in our way. We had to walk right by him. This man is at least 6'5". Like, I'm lifting my face up to look up at his face. He's tall. He's big. He's grabbed this girl. She can't be more than 5'9". He grabs her by the arm and kind of almost pulls her off the court. He's yelling in her face. She turns to get her face away from his face. He goes in for more yelling face time. I'm up in the stands and I stood up and I was like, why is he allowed to grab this girl? My husband was like, her parents are here somewhere. Calm down. I glance over, I see a bunch of parents and they're kind of shaking their heads and looking at each other. And then it goes on. So after the game, more antics, just vile behavior from this man towards his team. Remember, this is not my daughter's team. This is the team they're playing. They lose to our team by 2 points. He's livid. They all sit down in a circle. He's yelling at them. The next game begins to play. We go over to buy a t-shirt to commemorate the event because you know how your kid always has to have a t-shirt. And our daughter tells us that while she was playing, he was bad-mouthing the girls on our team. Oh, don't worry about her. She can't shoot. Oh, don't. He was yelling this onto the court, and the refs let him do that. Why is this story important to what happened in Parkland, Florida? In Parkland, there were numerous cases, between 23 and 39 instances. That's only including the calls to the police, not including the FBI tips, the calls to 911, just the calls to the Broward County Police Department. 23 is what they say they got. 39 is what was reported in the news media. Either way, more than 3 tips, more than 3 times the police was called to that house and they had to respond. Not a police report filed. They did not arrest him. They did not involuntarily commit him. They did not file charges against him, which would have then put him into the court system, and a conviction would have made him a prohibited possessor and he would never been able to buy the AR-15. What does this have to do with the story I told you about the crazy man? Because some people feel as if once a coach is in charge of their child, they don't have the right to speak up. They feel as if they tell the police something, if the police don't act on it, their work there is done. They have no more culpability. I'm here to tell you that's wrong. We were talking about it at the little barbecue joint afterwards, and me and one of the other moms, who happens to be one of the coaches of the team, I said I would have been down there and me and that big old 300-pound, 6'5" man would have been on the floor because he wouldn't have been able to grab my child and get away with it. Am I advocating violence? No, but I'm saying someone has to stand up. Someone has to say, well, I called the police, that didn't work. Now I'm going to call the psychologist. Now I'm going to go to the school. Now I'm going to pull my kid out. Now I'm going to go to the news media. I have to do something. I can't leave this with the authorities. I can't leave this with that violent coach. I have to do something. Until we all feel that urgency, we're going to see Parklands happen again and again and again. It's time for us to step up. It's not the police department's responsibility. In the end, do your kids go to that school? Then it's your responsibility. They're your kids, all of the kids. What are you going to do about it? When we get back, we'll have our first guest of the day and more on this discussion. StacyOnTheRight.com. Be right back.
Hi, I'm Will Addison, and we are partnering with the Ministry of Preborn to save babies' lives through ultrasound. Here's how a nurse describes the power of an ultrasound.
Last week, just one example of a mom who came in, was very abortion-minded, and when she saw the picture of her baby on ultrasound and heard that beating heart, it was a defining moment that just broke her, and she said, I just can't allow this baby to be killed.
By letting a mother hear her baby's heartbeat and see her baby in the womb, she will choose life 80% of the time.
I cannot tell you how many times a baby's life is saved through ultrasound. It's just an incredible tool.
Underwrite a free ultrasound and help save a baby's life. Go to preborn.com. That's preborn.com. Or dial pound 250 and say keyword baby. All gifts are tax deductible. Your love can save a life.
Hello, this is Bishop Harry Jackson of Hope Christian Church in Beltsville, Maryland. Jesus said, you would do greater works than he did. Jonah 2, 7 and 8. Jonah chapter 2, 7 and 8 in the NIV version says this. Those who cling to worthless idols forfeit the grace that could be theirs. They forfeit the grace that could be theirs. In other words, there is a reservation. There is a confirmation number. There is a credit card on file, but you don't check in. Those who cling to worthless idols forfeit. They don't activate that reservation and its privileges that have already been paid for. Come on now. They forfeit, in one translation, it says they forfeit the hesed. That word is the loving kindness, the tender mercies of God. They forfeit the unmerited favor. They forfeit that which Jesus paid for that has no requirement of your payment, no ability for you to pay for it. You're like a homeless man that could be staying tonight in the Marriott with all the food taken care of, but you won't show up if you cling to worthless idols. Join us this Sunday morning at 6251 Avondale Road in Beltsville or on the web at thehopeconnection.org.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
Welcome back to the program, everybody. If you are watching on live stream, if you're listening on the many, many channels where we are broadcasting on live radio, no matter where you are, welcome. Welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being with us. And thank you for sharing the show and for subscribing to the weekly newsletter over at stacyontheright.com. Right now, it's my pleasure to have our next guest join the program. It is Kevin Ring, president of Families Against Mandatory Minimums, or FAMM. The website is famm.org. Thank you so much for joining us today, Kevin.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's talk about your organization's ideas for prison reform. What exactly are you proposing that we need to change and do differently to help kids and young adults?
Sure. Well, this is something President Trump has announced his support for, and the idea is when people serve their sentences and get out, making sure that they're ready to become productive members of the community again so that we're all safer. And right now, in our federal prison system in many states, prisoners are spending time not really doing anything. We're just warehousing them. And some don't have job skills when they go in. Some have job skills, but they lose them as they sit there for years. And if they have the opportunity to pursue their education, they're limited because they don't have computer access or things like that. And so when people come out, they're more likely to reoffend. And our view is that we should use this time while they're in prison to reduce crime by helping them work on job skills, get drug and alcohol treatment, get behavioral counseling, and get job skills so that they come out and join our society as productive members.
So let's talk a little bit about the cost associated with that. If we're talking about the, different people, they're going to prison. Are you putting them in tiers so the most violent offenders are kind of last in line and the people who are there for the shortest amount of time are up front? Or how are you delineating between people who obviously need to be incarcerated and just, giving computer labs and things like that to every person who's in prison?
Sure. You certainly want to be careful about, we're not advocating computer access for people who are in there for, child pornography or, crimes that are tied to their internet usage. But we start from a baseline of this. 94% of all prisoners in this country are going to go home someday. And so the question is, are they going to come home in better shape or worse shape? And so even serious violent offenders, if they're going to come home, we want to make sure that they get any sort of anger management, treatment, behavioral counseling, substance abuse treatment that they need. So we really would target everybody who is coming home, not people who are serving life or natural life sentences. The sentences in this country are plenty long. I mean, we don't have an under punishment problem in this country. We have the largest number of prisoners in the civilized world and the highest incarceration rate. So the question is, why do we have such a high recidivism rate? Why is it that when people leave prison in this country, they tend to go back? And our view is that what you want to do is try to, do as much as you can while they're in. You literally have a captive audience. And so some people say, well, that's fine for low-level offenders or somebody who's caught with drug use possession, but not somebody who commits a more serious offense. The truth is, the lower-level offenders are not the ones who are likely to repeat. It is the more serious offenders. So those are the people you really want to target your programming to.
Okay, so we're talking about people who've murdered people who've dealt drugs and, helped to spread addiction around neighborhoods, people who are repeat offenders because by the time they make it to prison, they've already been arrested a few times. Some of them have been convicted a few times. And you're saying that the programming that you're suggesting would help them not to reoffend?
Sure. I mean, not everybody, that's for sure. It's definitely not foolproof, and people are going to make mistakes, and people who are going to, if your crime is rooted in an addiction, you certainly should treat that, because whether you punish somebody for 2 years or 10 years, if you don't treat that underlying addiction, when they come out, they're no better off.
Okay, so what does the treatment involve? What are the kind of parameters around this new idea for helping people who are being, so they're incarcerated, you want to treat them while they're incarcerated, you don't want them just working or just working out or just getting education. So what all does it involve?
No, that's exactly right. So we did a survey of federal prisoners in the country, and right now there's already a drug treatment program in the federal prisons that works pretty well. It has been proven to reduce the recidivism rate, the rate that people reoffend when they come out. Anybody who completes this program is less likely to reoffend. So we know that's a program that works. We also have studies that show that increasing your education level can reduce recidivism, and yet we don't allow people to do that. In our federal prison system, the education programs are usually just courses that are taught by other inmates, things like current events or parenting class or things that are really just make work but don't really do anything. And the same is true of job skills. Most of the jobs in prisons are just to keep the compound running, which is fine. Some people want to be cooks, some people want to be janitors and the rest. But there's other things you could teach them, apprenticeships in plumbing or HVAC or electrical, that are job skills they could do when they get out. And so it's really nothing new. It's just we do a very little of it. So with drug treatment, for instance, we would just treat everybody whose crime is a product of an addiction as opposed to just a certain smaller subclass of those. So it's really not a new concept. It's just putting some more effort and resources into that, because in the end, we're all going to be safer if we do it.
Okay, so I'm on your website, FAMM.org. Create more meaningful work opportunities, increase access to computers. I'm feeling not so supportive of the increased access to computers because screen time is largely not impactful. When you look at K through 12 education, when they introduce computer screens and one-to-one programs, the quality of the education goes down. The amount of time kids spend on computers off task, it increases exponentially, and different mechanisms that they use to try to prevent that from happening aren't effective. Traditional learning methodology, where you're using books and pen and paper, are much more effective at long-term learning that yields better, higher educational results. But you have that as one of your tabs: expand and keep current vocational training, treat all prisoners with drug abuse, provide mental health and behavioral counseling. Let's talk about that one a little bit. So exactly what would that entail? Because most people, the first thing you say if someone does something illegal is, oh, they're crazy or they're a deranged lunatic. But not every person who commits crimes is mentally ill. Or is that possibly what we think?
Of course. No, I agree with you. No, there's sort of two categories there. One is, and this is partly in drug treatment, which is this idea of cognitive behavioral therapy. And that's really thinking about thinking. Doesn't work for everybody, but it's been proven to work. A lot of the people who are in prison who are not crazy, you and I would not call them that, and they're really not, they don't belong on any sort of spectrum. It's just they have poor impulse control, there's anger management issues, and there is counseling that could work to help them catch themselves, to think about their thinking patterns, there are tests that will show your criminal thinking, things like, the DAC is stacked against me, or I can steal that because that company is rich and they're not going to miss it. There's people who sort of fail those basic tests that we would understand as, sort of criminal thinking versus law-abiding thinking. And that is something that actually has been proven to reduce recidivism in programs that have been run. And it's incorporated into the drug treatment. But people who don't have an addiction then don't have access to that treatment. And that's something that would work. In terms of mental health and the people that we would say have issues that are, diagnosable, the thought there is being untreated in prison is just a disaster for everybody. It's certainly not good for them. It's not good for other inmates and guards and for the health of the, compound or the campus where they are. So some people probably should be in mental hospitals as opposed to in prisons. And the fact that most State Department of Corrections secretaries now say that they run the largest mental health facilities in their state is a sad commentary on that not everybody is crazy who commits a crime, but there are a certain number of people who are in prisons right now with untreated medical conditions or mental health conditions that should be better off in a hospital.
Okay, so that's you just gave us a lot right there. The mental health situation, I think, has further reaching implications, and I think that a lot of the violence we see in society by people who are legitimately mentally impaired could be ameliorated by simply going back to the model we had before, where we did have state-run mental institutions or maybe privately run mental institutions that can receive some federal funding that can help people deal with the issues that people are facing. I mean, it's these people are going out and killing people, and then when they've killed a bunch of different people, they then end up in prison when they should have been in a mental institution before they had the opportunity to kill anyone.
I agree. Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that at all.
So how do we get that done? I mean, it's not like I'm saying we need to lock more people up, but there are clearly some people who should have gotten some inpatient, mental treatment before they were able to harm others. And we seem to lack the facilities for that. I guess in the 80s and 90s, those facilities were largely closed and drawn down. How do we get back to where we need to be so we can serve people?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I think one thing is the commitment that you're talking about, which is just the idea that is a problem we face right now, and that sending somebody to a box for 6 months or a couple of years and not treating them, and then when they act up in their institution, you send them into isolation, and so then they're sitting in a room by themselves for a couple of years, and then they just come out. And they're no better off. And these are dangerous people. And so it's just a better job of screening people as they come through the system. When you're talking about how do we prevent them from committing crime in the first place, I can't profess to having any expertise on how we could be screening that. I mean, if you look what happened in Florida, I mean, the cops were there, dozens of times. And I think we get into a very tough situation about how hard is it to remove somebody from a home? Or how do we remove somebody from civil society when they may or may not have violated the law, but we just know that they're dealing with mental illness? I think those are tough questions. I mean, it's not something that we can really take on or we have any expertise in, but that is an important issue.
It is, and I agree with you. We lack the expertise, but I think the conversation belongs here with us because the people who claim to have the expertise have been derelict in exercising it. They don't have any plans. No one's bringing forward policy solutions. All we're focusing on is what kind of gun was used in the attack, not the fact that the person who did the attack actually mutilated birds and small rodents and really displayed a lot of classic textbook sociopathic behaviors before actually becoming a school shooter. And he would have used other types of weapons as well. Like he was actually learning how to make bombs. So it's not as if the gun was really the integral part of the plan. It was just what was available to him. He went out, tried to buy a firearm he could. And so he used that. If he couldn't have been able to buy a firearm, he would have gone on to make incendiary devices. The kid needed to be removed as opposed to us discussing the tools that he used.
I mean, just speaking for myself, you get no pushback from me on that. I mean, and what's so scary about this situation is if those weren't warning signs we could catch, I don't know what will, right? I mean, how could this kid have been clearer about his intentions, and we still couldn't do it? So it's very frightening. And I agree with you. Focusing on the instrumentality is really missing the point.
So let's talk a little bit about what can be done, because you are working with prison reform, but there has to be some mechanism. Mm-hmm. Let's say you're a parent and you're in, you're in a community, you have kids, and your kids and all your kids' friends are all afraid of this one kid. This one kid has, been in trouble at school, but never really been involved with the police. Do you call the police? I know there were people who called 911 about Nicholas Cruz. How often do you call? What would you recommend to people to try to get some kind of help when you realize there's someone in my environment that might be potentially dangerous?
Again, I mean, I can't profess any expertise on this. I can tell you what I would do as a father of two young daughters. I mean, I certainly would call the police in that situation. My concern is that the police were called and went to this kid's house. Mm-hmm. And so at some point, I mean, it is frightening to see these kids say, we all knew it, and we all told them. Every teacher and every student said this was the guy they were going to do it, and they kicked them out of the school. So that would have given me some comfort. And so, you just don't know. But I mean, it seems to me that the kids and the community and the parents, everybody did the right thing. It's just law enforcement did not take action in the way it seems they had the authority to do when they certainly could have removed weapons from his house. Everyone knew he had weapons as well.
Yeah.
And so they could have at least taken away, and I don't disagree with what you said. I mean, he would have found access to something else, but that could have been a sign to everyone that, they were watching him, but nothing happened. So I don't know. I don't know all the facts either, but it seems to me that this is, the thing that's most frightening about it is that people say, well, I had an idea, but I didn't say anything. That's not true here. Everyone said something.
Yeah. That's the part that I think is the most frightening to many, many of the people who are watching the story who have children. We're all thinking, well, what more could we do? There are other things I think we can do moving forward, and so I'm going to talk about that after the break. But you, sir, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it. FAMM.org is the website. Prison Reform.
Thank
Kevin
you.
Ring, president of Families Against Mandatory Minimums. Thank you for your time and your work in this area.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Let's go to the break. We'll be back with more Stacy on the right after these messages. Stay there.
The Capital One commercial will forever be etched in the ear of the listener. What's in your wallet is a phrase that won't easily be forgotten. But this is not a Capital One plug. I want you to think about the people that are in your circle of influence. Who's in your circle is my new catchphrase, simply because we don't think enough about the people or spirits that we allow into our personal space. Negativity is contagious and fatal. Misery loves company, and it's fatal to your hopes and dreams. I think we all know someone who, no matter what good has happened, always has something negative to say. Ugh, that really bothers me. That bad attitude and that pessimistic spirit will only cause you to do the same. There's no room for doubt, especially if you're believing God to bring that vision to fruition. Now, this is not a license for you to be mean. It is, however, a license for you to assess who's in your circle and make the necessary adjustments. With a heart for the urban family, I'm today's urban woman, Tony Johnson. Connect with us at urbanfamilytalk.com.
Listen to Stacy on the Right with Stacy Washington on Urban Family Talk. She's sharp.
I mean, did you hear that?
Pointed.
Remember that you're not only a Christian on Sunday.
And insightful.
Deception and lies have been accepted as the norm from the Democrats.
But most of all, she's on the right.
That scripture from the Bible that says the heart of the fool inclines to the left just kept popping into my mind.
Stacy on the Right. Now heard weekday afternoons from 2 to 4 Central on Urban Family Talk.
Every day of our life is an invitation is come and dine. We snack and nibble on the word. Remember, the goal is that you learn truths to put to work in your life. Remember, you don't want to learn truth just to say you know it. Your goal should be to learn truth in order to implement it, to put it to work in your life, and receive the benefit and the blessing of it, because we will never be fulfilled not fulfilling our purpose and our calling in life. Lock into your purpose.
Tune in to the Hour of Intercession, weekday afternoons at 1 Central on Urban Family Talk.
Life is never picture perfect. Human beings come in all different shapes, sizes, colors, and abilities. No matter how much we plan, no matter how much we think we're prepared, the unplanned happens all the time. It's how we respond to the unexpected that shows our true humanity. But many do not see the value of every human life. Too many are willing to discard those who don't fit the picture of perfection. Abortion destroys the chance to love and to be loved. We never know what will fill the frames of our lives, or how empty those frames can be when we allow exceptions.
Every life is a gift.
Learn more at www.radiance.life.
This is Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
Senator Marco Rubio, who participated in the town hall and took some very tough and emotional questions from members of the community, he tweeted that a ban of all semi-automatic weapons is a, quote, position well outside the mainstream. Now, I know that there is this differentiation that gun control supporters believe in. There's assault weapons, and then there's all the other semi-automatic weapons. But Rubio's point, and it's not incorrect, is that just a few changes and one is legal and one is not legal. Do you support a ban on all semi-automatic weapons?
So I support a ban on assault weapons, and assault weapons are defined by state law, not as all semi-automatic weapons. There are particular characteristics of these assault weapons, things that look like automatic weapons but are actually semi-automatic, that make these killings much more easily. For instance, the bullets coming out of these guns, these long rifle semi-automatic weapons, travel at 3 times the speed of a handgun, and as doctors have described post-Parkland, they do something to your insides that a bullet coming out of a revolver doesn't. So, no, I don't think we're talking about a ban on all semi-automatic weapons. I think we're talking about very tightly defined assault weapons that make the semi-automatic weapons turn into weapons of mass destruction.
Poppycock. They're talking about a ban of all semi-automatic weapons. That is absolutely what they want. This whole statement by Chris Murphy is just pure, unadulterated lying. And so when you hear that, you need to know what you're listening to. You need to understand who these people are. This is an incremental push that was set into motion by President Obama. So why did we have the Parkland shooting? Well, part of the reason why so many people reported 39 times, 2 FBI reports, and numerous calls to 911. Some is from as far-flung places as Michigan. This kid's in Florida. People are reporting him from all over the country. As our last guest said, what more could have been done? Well, there's a consequence when you elect someone who's lawless, who feels that life in the womb is above his pay grade, that he can evolve on marriage. Do you think these things are happening in silos by themselves? Do you think the passage of homosexual marriage is law of the land, and our continual subservience to the God of birth control and convenience when it comes to the lives of unborn babies, that we continue to abort 900,000 some odd babies a year, that there's going to be no repercussion? All of these things are connected. The complacency among parents, the idea that government is supposed to fix this problem that was created by government. So what am I talking about? I'm talking about the fact that, and now I know Conservative Treehouse is a website that I go to. Some people have said they have alt-right leanings. Okay, so, talk amongst yourselves about that. On this story, they were the first ones to have an unrolled thread on Twitter to discuss the fact that an Obama-era policy is the reason why this kid was over and over and over again dealt with at his school, referred to the police, and they didn't do anything about it. Now, we could talk a whole hour about how the police officer that was the school resource officer, who coincidentally lived rent-free on the school property, never entered the building and stood outside in like a threat position, sandwiched in between his car and the door, listening to the kids getting shot for 4 minutes. 4 minutes of that rampage, he stood outside and did nothing. We could talk about that, and we might get back into it. But right now, we need to talk about why was there even a school resource officer living on the school grounds? Why were there 39 calls? Why wasn't there an arrest? Because he was a student. Why? Because of an Obama-era policy. So there's something called the school to jail pipeline. I've talked about it here on the show many, many times. And it's something that all educators, anyone who works in the space, whether you're a school board member, if you're a volunteer, if you're a parent, if you're Black, if you're white, if you're Hispanic, everyone knows it exists. Everyone understands it's connected to children being unable to read and do math in the 4th grade, that prisons create beds for those kids. When they get those numbers back from the Department of Education in every state, the prisons in those states that receive prisoners from those jurisdictions prepare beds in the future for those kids because they know they're going to be in jail. Being uneducated is connected to being in jail. That's what the school to jail pipeline is. So the Department of Education under Obama created a policy that stated that too many minority kids were ending up in jail. So instead of intervening in their lives, trying to improve their home lives, trying to make sure they could read and write and do math, they basically just said, look, schools, law enforcement, we encourage you to ignore these negative behaviors that are coming out of these schools that disproportionately impact Black students, and we want you to lower the charges. So the first offense is not the first offense. You need to see them a multiple bunch of times. If someone makes a mistake once, you're not going to arrest them for that. Even if they've injured someone, even if they've broken ribs, even if they've done an armed robbery, if it's a kid and they're connected to a public school, you're not going to adjudicate that in the same way that you have. You're going to give these kids more chances. So instead of these lenient, lax policies reducing the amount of criminality, of course it exploded. They stopped arresting the offenders, and that is why a bunch of these things have occurred. And so the reason why I'm so animated, because I agree with Kevin Ring that everyone in this instance, and by everyone I mean the non-government affiliated people, not the teachers, but not the police, but the parents, they did what they could. They called. They spoke to the principal. They called the police. They called 911. 2 people reported this kid to the FBI. They did what they could do, but it didn't do anything because of this Obama era policy. And this is what bad leadership brings. It brings death and destruction. When we bow down to the God of our race or our, I'm a woman, you're a man. We start bowing down to that. When we yield the sovereignty of God over to our characteristics, then we get the leaders that we deserve. And Obama was exactly that guy, because he put this policy in place and he laid the ground for Parkland to happen last week. And if you don't like what I just said, don't take it up with me. These are the facts on the ground that I'm reporting to you. It's not a messenger problem. It's not an AR-15 problem. It's a we elected Barack Obama problem. So, because he was not a problem solver, and you know that. So why did these officers sit outside? Well, they'd been conditioned not to react to anything that these students did wrong. Years and years of this going on, they're receiving federal funds to stand down and not prosecute these teenagers for doing crimes, some of them violent crimes. Nicholas Cruz was known to, if you offended him in class, he'd pick a chair up and hurl it at you. He injured people. He was still allowed to be there for years and years until they finally expelled him from the school. So what are we really talking about here when it comes to the policies that people are raising up? People are saying the government needs to ban certain types of guns. The government needs to mandate that teachers are armed. And I have supported arming teachers previous to this incident. I no longer feel that arming teachers is the answer to these school shootings. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have school resource officers in the building. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have people who are already concealed carry certified who happen to be teachers permitted to carry their firearms into the school building as they would into any other place that they're lawfully permitted to carry. So that's everywhere but federal buildings and the post office. I'm saying the idea that we're going to now train up a bunch of teachers in educational systems that are largely run by liberals to carry firearms into school buildings, I'm not as gung-ho about that as I previously was after reading this story and learning all the facts that surround it. So I've been talking about what we can do. What can we do? So let's go to the word, because right now this conversation is in-house. It's for us, by us, from the word, for people who are Christians. And I don't mean that a person who's not a professing Christian can't hear it, but I'm speaking specifically to people who have been imbued with the Holy Spirit, with power from God, the mind of Christ, people who believe that their source is not the government. It's not some radio show, other God himself. Bind this spirit of death that is currently rampaging across this country for your kid's school building. Well, first things first, you have to kind of think through whether or not you want your kid in a building, 1,800 kids, assorted educators and administrators, 1,800 kids, and they're not allowed to pray over their food. They're not allowed to, crack their Bible open. No Bible clubs allowed. Is that really where you want your child as a Christian? That's the first thing. Now, if you feel so led and that's where your child is and that's where they're going to stay, then that's when you start walking the prayer walk around that building. Now, I know Joy Behar and a bunch of other really cool Christians would say, oh my goodness, she sounds like a lunatic. She's recommending that we pray. I absolutely am recommending that you bind that building in prayer. Yes, I am. And if you're too ashamed to do it, if you're too ashamed to go there on a Saturday afternoon when the building is unoccupied and walk around the grounds with your Bible out, speaking the word of God over that building, your preciously great power for us who believe, that power is the same as the mighty strength. Ephesians 6:10 says, finally be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. 2 Timothy 1:7 says, for the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but it gives us power, love, and self-discipline. Now, if you really want to be radical, I recommend you show up at the flag and you happening. Already heard. They want to hear you have the power to speak into these situations and to be in those buildings, and through your light and the word of your mouth, bring others who are dying and lost into the one true knowledge of Jesus Christ and his saving power. What are you waiting on? If we're going to rely on the government, you see what just happened. Because of policies put forward by Barack Obama, they're not arresting kids. They're not even going to go in the building and stop one kid with an AR-15. A properly trained police officer, which all 4 of those men were, multiple decades on the police force, they could have taken that kid out in less than 60 seconds. If you don't believe me, go online and watch the videos about how police put down active shooters. When they understand lives are at stake and they're actually decent and committed to their jobs, they can end an active shooter situation within 60 seconds of arriving on the scene. It doesn't always happen like that, but that's what's possible, and that's what could have happened, and that would have saved lives. But it didn't happen because, hey, you want to ban all signs of Christianity? You want it so Christians can't speak out? Then this is what you get. But the answer is not that Christians can't speak out. We can speak anywhere we want to. Nobody can prevent you from praying every time you're in your kid's school building. You know that whatever you pray for, if it's the will of God, it's yours. His word is not if and so and possibly maybe. It is right now, yes, if you pray the will of God. Do you think it's his will? The children are getting gunned down in school? No, that's our culture. That's our culture that's playing out right there. The culture of America, the culture of secularism, the culture of Christians need to sit down. You don't get to have your 10 commandments. You don't get to have kids praying in school. You don't get to have your Bible clubs. Okay, well, now what do you got? Now how do you like it? You want Christians to sit down and be quiet, but you don't want to reap what you're sowing. When pull that hand back, pull that hand of favor and grace back. That's what you're doing when you tell Christians to back off. So I'm saying, don't listen to that. Don't back off. 2 Timothy 1:7 says, for the Spirit of God, the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid. It gives us power, love, and self-discipline. The discipline that you need is prayer. So absolutely, we have to report when our kids are all afraid of the same kid. We should call the police. You call the police once, your neighbor should call the police. The husband should call the police. The wife should call the police. Everyone should be calling the police until someone does something. Call the FBI, call Homeland Security, call DIA, call the CIA, whoever you want to call. But while you're making those calls, you need to be praying over these buildings, praying over these kids. The same way you put your hand on them at night when they're deep asleep and you speak God's word over them, you need to be putting your hand on the doorposts of these buildings, these federally paid for, taxpayer-funded buildings. They're your buildings. They're your kids. It's your responsibility. Speak the word of God over these buildings and over these children and watch, doesn't it change? Don't deny the power of the living God. Use it as he has given you the authorization to do. This is your job. These are your kids. You want to stop these school shootings? We're going to talk about other mechanisms, other means for doing that. But first, it starts with prayer. Christians, rise up. Let's do what we've been called to do. We'll be back with Hour 2 right after these messages. Stay there.
Urban Family Talk. Urban Family Talk.
Hey, I'm Miki, co-host of Aaron the Addisons on Urban Family Talk. I want to invite you to be part of our online chat community we've affectionately called The Churbin. While you listen to your favorite programs, you have the opportunity to communicate in real time with the hosts of those programs and other Urban Family listeners. Find out what the talk is all about. Become a Churbinite at urbanfamilytalk.com.
Truth, wisdom, empowerment. Urban Family Talk, a ministry of the American Family Association.
American Family News, I'm Rusty Pugh. Meeting with many of the nation's governors at the White House, President Trump touched on a number of topics from the economy to improving global trade to gun control. The president told the assembled governors that something needs to be done in the wake of the Parkland, Florida high school shooting and that a lack of action is not acceptable.
We'll turn our grief into action. We have to have action. We don't have any action. It happens. A week goes by, let's keep talking. Another week goes by, we keep talking. 2 months go by, all of a sudden everybody's off to the next subject. Then when it happens again, everybody's angry and let's start talking again. We got to stop.
The president went on to say that he recently had spoken with the leadership of the National Rifle Association, and he believes they would agree to implementing sensible gun reform. Meanwhile, U.S. companies are taking steps to distance themselves from the National Rifle Association after the Florida school shooting, but one organization says they're carrying the water for extremists.
Enterprise, Hertz, MetLife Incorporated, and Symantec Corporation, which makes Norton antivirus technology, are among the businesses cutting ties with the NRA and its members. Robert Kuykendall of Second Vote says the companies are alienating people who believe in the Second Amendment.
They're carrying the water for a group of extremists that will do anything to demonize guns, gun ownership, and undermine the Second Amendment.
Kuykendall adds the anti-gun left is not going to stop.
Their agenda for centuries has been to disarm the public. And, we have the Second Amendment for a reason. Our founders believed that the populace should be able to arm themselves to protect their freedoms, to protect themselves, to protect their homes. And the anti-gun left just doesn't want that. So they're going to continue going after organizations that work to protect those rights. And that's why it's important for your listeners to reach out and say, we don't want you doing the left's bidding. on and distancing yourself from the NRA, because what the NRA is doing is protecting a very basic Second Amendment right.
Second Vote has been streaming live video of a gun for 200-plus days. The purpose? To show that guns do not commit crimes.
What happens is very sick individuals, very evil individuals use guns to do evil, and to demonize the gun is a misplacement of priorities.
I'm Chris Woodward.
A national defense analyst agrees with the assessment of a major naval commander that North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un's long-term goal is to reunify the divided Korean peninsula under his totalitarian regime.
Recently, Admiral Harry Harris, Jr., the outgoing commander of the U.S. Pacific Command, told the House Armed Services Committee that there's a prevailing view that Kim needs a nuclear arsenal to safeguard his regime. But Harris says Kim is after much more. He says Kim's long view is reunification under a single communist system. Frank Gaffney, who is president and CEO of the Center for Security Policy, says unfortunately the South Koreans are desperate to accommodate the regime.
The North Koreans, I think, are emboldened by what they're seeing from South Korea at the moment. My guess is that in the space of the next few months, we're going to see the South Koreans making an array of further concessions to the North Koreans.
Gaffney says the pandering by the South Korean president at the Olympics was disturbing.
I think it horrified a lot of his countrymen, by the way, but he's determined to find some kind of accommodation with the North, and it may well come at the expense of South Korea's sovereignty.
And Gaffney thinks the North could achieve its goal without military hostilities.
That's what's really troubling here, is whether there is some willingness on the part of the South Korean government to allow this kind of unification on terms other than military by basically surrendering to the North. Hard as that is to imagine, but stranger things have happened.
I'm Chad Groening.
And the death toll rose to at least 5 on Sunday after severe storms swept through the central U.S., spawning a tornado and widespread flooding from the upper Midwest to Appalachia. The system stretched from Texas to the Canadian Maritime provinces. American Family News is online at onenewsnow.com. I'm Rusty Pugh.
American Family Coffee is coffee with a cause. Not only is it a delicious way to start your day, but it can also wake you up to the idea of supporting the American Family Association through a product you'd normally buy anyway. And you know, there's almost nothing as wholesome and basic to American culture as a good cup of coffee. Choose from morning blend, evening blend, and everything in between. Get your American Family Coffee and support the American Family Association at afastore.net.
Welcome to Stacy on the Right with your host, Stacy Washington.
And like emotional, so.
But as this community struggles to heal, troubling new details are emerging that suggest 2 deputies may have missed warnings that confessed gunman Nicholas Cruz was a ticking time bomb. One caller said Cruz planned to shoot up the school. And then there was this call 2.5 months ago.
It says he could be a school shooter in the making. How can anybody miss that? That's not a clue. That's a scream.
All I could tell you is the caller, as you know, came from Massachusetts. She told the deputy that the subject, the killer, the eventual killer, was in somewhere in Palm Beach County.
How is it that that basic piece of information was not pursued?
What we're looking into is, did he follow up? Did he send it over?
And indications at this point are?
Indications at this point is that he did not.
Law enforcement sources tell NBC News that police from another department witnessed 3 arriving deputies take defensive positions outside.
I'm not going to tell you that other Broward Sheriff's deputies didn't go in when they should have, but I'm not going to say the opposite either. We are going to investigate. We're going to do it thoroughly.
Welcome back to the program, everybody. Call lines are open at 866-963-2037. I'm Stacy Washington, host of Stacy on the Right. I'm also the co-chair of National Center's Project 21 Black Leadership Advisory Council, and it's my pleasure to be with you today. For the remainder of the program, we have more discussions about this Parkland shooting and what our responsibility is as Christians towards, not just caring for our own, not just caring for the ones that are, are the little ones that we've been given, who your little ones might be like mine. Now they're kind of big ones or adult-sized kids, but they're still my responsibility to take care of, and my husband, and those in the community in which we choose to be a part of. All of this is it's all a part. There's no separating any of this off. And that is why you see so much of a discussion right now focused on the AR-15. Great boogeyman. I got one here. It has never jumped up and killed anyone on its own. In fact, I did a little YouTube showing it just laying there inert, refusing to be proactive and jump up and go do something on its own because it is an inanimate object. It's like a spoon or a bottle of water. It can't kill on its own. But in the hands of someone with malice and horrible intentions, then of course it becomes a deadly tool. And that is the same with explosives and knives and so many other things that people use to kill each other with. So what's the answer? Do we deal with what's in people's hearts, or do we just deal with what some people can buy, what some people choose not to buy, and what other people, they don't even know enough about it to be talking about it? I'm speaking to you, mainstream media. They mostly are just spouting off stuff they've seen in memes on Twitter. They don't know jackola about the differences between firearms and their capabilities. Because I tell you what, I've seen videos on YouTube that show that someone who's using a bump stock, your accuracy is thrown off so much that they're almost worthless. Also, bump stocks are made of plastic, so you can print them with a printer. With the 3D printers that are now, everybody's got one. A 3D printer can print a bump stock. So you can make it illegal all you want, but as long as there's a plan for it and 3D printers, those are going to exist. So by all means, make them illegal and see what that gets us. More of the same. The bigger deal is that someone who is an experienced shooter, who's practiced, can shoot faster than a bump stock can allow them to do with a higher degree of accuracy through practice, simple practice with a firearm. So is that the answer? No, it isn't. In fact, that amount of time I just spent talking about that is valuable minutes we can't get back, wasted time, because that's not the answer. So last segment, if you're just tuning into the program, we listened to a bit of audio and we went through some scriptures, and I want to give them now in this hour too, because I want to make sure that this isn't missed. If there's anything you get out of this program this week, if you can't listen to it until today and you won't be able to listen to it again, I'm glad you're listening now because you need to hear this. What you need to hear is that we have been given power by God for these types of situations. We have been given his power and his might. And that's an awesome, awesome statement if you think about it. The same God who spoke everything we see into existence, the entire universe, which all exists in concert to make life on earth possible for us, beings who he created in his own image. That same God has imbued us with power. And we are to use that power by praying and by not being silent in these situations. So first off, before we get to any more of it, because we heard the audio, the Broward sheriff deflecting responsibility. He's on the Today Show on NBC. He's deflecting. I want to give you another example of where we're just backing off. We're just going into our little garages and our little houses or our big houses, and we're doing whatever we do. And as Christians, we've just zipped our lips and we're like, well, you know what? Then they're going to have to deal with that because I don't have time. I'm busy. I have Bible study. I have this. I have that. I'm doing what I need to do. I'm reading my word. I'm doing devotions every day. And so these people are just going to have to perish. And that's the truth. But can't it be so much better? Do we have to have these school shootings? My answer to that is no. That's my opinion. So there's an anti-religion activist group called the Freedom from Religious Foundation. You've heard of these people before. And they're threatening to sue the city of Findlay, Ohio over a mural that shows an eagle and a Bible verse. They claim that the mural is unconstitutional because it conveys government support for religion through the phrase, "Under his wings shall you find refuge." This is an example of what I talked to you about last hour, how atheists want us to get out of public life. They want to run us out of our own country. When you know good and well, there are plenty of atheist countries on this planet where atheists could go and live with no threat of religion ever being seen in their view at all, but they'd rather take it from us here. That is the spirit of the devil. That is them operating within that area which they have become accustomed, which is they're against God. They're planning on spending their eternity separated from him. The question is, are you going to allow everyone around you to be negatively impacted by their desire to spend eternity away from Jesus Christ? My answer to that is no. You should not allow that. The people of Findlay, Ohio should rise up and tell the Freedom of Religion Foundation to go find another town to harass because they're keeping their mural. And in fact, they're going to add some more things. Expect to fight all the way to the Supreme Court and then expect us to do civil disobedience in order to preserve our Christian heritage. this is not your town. This isn't your fight. And if you come at us, we're going to come against you. We're not only going to pray outside your house every day. We're not going to do prayer walks around you in your workplace and in your home place. We're also going to actually legitimately pray for you, for the Lord to bless you and to save you. So if you really want to spend eternity separated from Christ, you need to leave us alone in the town of Findlay, Ohio. We don't do that. We just, well, what can we do? We live in a fallen world. We live in a sin-sick world, and we just leave things to the sinners. We leave things to the people who they don't know anything better than we do. If they did, why are there school shootings? Why is there terrorism? Why is there so much death and destruction? If the secular way of living was so fantastic, why isn't it fixing everything? They told us if we could just get God out of everything, everything would be awesome. Well, they've taken God out of so many different things, and everything is still just the way it was before. In fact, it's worse. So what does God's word say about this? What is he telling us to do? Luke 10:19. I have given you authority to trample on snakes and scorpions and to overcome all the power of the enemy. Nothing will harm you. When God says to you in his word, I've given you authority, nothing will harm you, that is the license to go out and be a Christian. Not a Christian with the bumper stickers and the, little thing on your head and wearing a skirt down to your ankle, judging everybody in sight, but a powerful, spirit-filled Christian person who can speak into people's situations. Oh my goodness. What are you going through? Let's pray about it real quick. That person might not even be a Christian, but they'll be so grateful you cared enough about them to share your method for problem solving. Let's pray together real quick. Can I pray with you? Can I pray for you real quick about the situation? Pray and move on. You don't have to have a sermon. You don't even have to know how to pray like the people you see on the videos where they're praying and, it feels like the heavens have opened up and you can hear the angels in heaven singing you. Yeah, some people are gifted like that, but God respects all of their prayers. It's all communication. Have you ever heard your child stub their toe and not go see what happened to them because they stubbed their toe and they didn't sound eloquent? Have they ever made a request to you and you said, oh, you know what? You just didn't have any fire in your belly when you asked me for dinner tonight. No dinner. No. You do everything you can for your child. All they have to do is make a peep. How many times have you heard one of your children let out a little exclamation and you go running? You're like, what's going on? They're like, nothing. I just saw something funny. You're like, oh, I thought you were hurt. That's how God is about us, but even more so. Ephesians 1:19, and his incomparably great power for us who believes. That power is the same as the mighty strength. Come on now. You've already got that going on. All you have to do is start operating in it. So I'm not calling you to be loudly praying out in public and making, a spectacle of yourself. But there are times where prayer is ultimately appropriate. And at your kid's school, I dare say now it's open season. If there was ever a time in public life in educational institutions where people who maybe not so open to Christianity will keep their lips pressed together because they're desperate for any answer, it's now. People are now openly admitting that they're afraid to send their kids to school. Well, then homeschool them, first of all. And second of all, we don't operate in fear. We take control of the situation through the power of the Holy Spirit. We seek out God's will. We read the word. And then we go forward in what we feel called to do. So you're not going to go, and hold a prayer rally at your kid's school, at public school, and, bring a whole bunch of people to the Lord or have a church service there. That's not what you're called to do. But you are called, the best example of it is you're just in the building and you're praying silently to yourself. You're praying over those kids. You're praying over those teachers. You're praying over that building. You're paying attention to your kids. You now want to know, if you don't already, who's that wild and crazy kid? Who's the one that you guys think might be like a school shooter? Who has the wildest social media account? You can find that out from your kids. Get together with some of the other parents and say, let's talk to this kid's parent. Let's go over and offer them our assistance. Let's go over there and take them a basket of cookies or, a basket of muffins, some kind of carb. Y'all know it's wrong, but it's true. That's how you make friends. You bring carbs. Take them over, sit down with them, ask them if there's anything they need. Is there anything I can do for you? You don't have to go over there and say, I heard your kid's almost a school shooter. We're scared of him. What you going to do? You go over and find out what's going on over there. See if there's some way that you can help. Be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. No one can stop you. Not if you have the absolute, your focus is that you're going to do it. I mean, I've seen this so many times where someone who clearly doesn't have the prerequisites to do something, a year later, they're doing it because they decided this is what I'm going to do. And then they go do it. They don't allow their limitations or what other people think they should do to be what they can do. That's the situation here. For the spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline. So we're doing this out of love. We're not doing this because we hate atheists. We're not doing this because we hate the school administrators or we want to prove something. We don't have a bone to pick. We're Christians and we want to be the salt and light that God has called us to be right here on this earth. Because when we're not, that's what happens. When we allow the skin color to be our God, we vote in somebody who puts in policies that enable the Parkland shooting, such as what we did when we voted for Barack Obama. So many of us, especially those with the permanent tan. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm sorry if that's offensive, but you know what you're getting when you tune into this show. Don't hate. So now I want to listen to this man who just oversaw this horrible shooting. 4 of his officers didn't go in and do their jobs. He's actually deflecting and saying no one else in this country can keep the people safer than he can. After what, I mean, it's almost as if he's not aware that the shooting happened. It's number 2.
The sheriff says he has video proof that shows 54-year-old Deputy Scott Peterson did not pursue the gunman. Sources tell NBC News that internal affairs investigators believe before Deputy Peterson arrived at the building where the shooting was taking place, 10 people had been killed and 9 wounded on the first floor. But in the crucial 4 minutes while Peterson was outside, 6 more people were gunned down on the 3rd floor.
We know Peterson knew there were shots fired and chose not to go in.
Peterson resigned 8 days after the shooting. NBC News has tried unsuccessfully to reach him for comment. Now Sheriff Israel is under increasing pressure to resign. Nearly every Republican in the Florida House of Representatives has signed a letter to the governor calling for Sheriff Israel, an elected Democrat, to step down or be removed.
I don't think there's a man or woman in this county who could keep Broward County safer than I can. I'm proud to be the sheriff, and I plan to continue on being the sheriff.
So he's a Democrat, good friends with Hillary Clinton, very much proud of the work that he's done there that's overseen the deaths of 17 people, and 4 of his police officers who didn't bother to go in and even lift a finger, pull trigger number 1 to stop the school shooter. And he's proud. You see what happens when we put bad people in leadership? You get to reap what they think are good ideas and good policies. This man should never be in charge. He shouldn't even be in charge of a curb or a sidewalk, let alone a police department. All right, when we get back, we're going to have Ryan Anderson, Senior Research Fellow in American Principles and Public Policy at the Heritage Foundation. Such an honor and a privilege. I can't wait to talk to him. Stay right there. We'll be right back.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. We still have seats available for our September tours, Washington, D.C. and Williamsburg. Washington, D.C. and Mount Vernon, that's one tour. And then Williamsburg, Jamestown, and Yorktown, that is a separate tour. Now, we put them back to back so you can do both. If you're flying in from Texas or Montana or California or wherever you may be coming from, so that you can do those tours back to back with us if that's something you so choose to do. Now, Stephen McDowell of the Providence Foundation will be with us all along the way as our historian. Stephen will add context, he'll answer questions, talk about the people, the places, the events that make up our early American history. So for more information on this Spiritual Heritage Tour, go to the website spiritualheritagetours.com. spiritualheritagetours.com for the September tour information.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, we have once again been hearing that we need to do something to stem gun violence. Even though most gun purchases are significantly regulated, are there any gun law reforms being proposed that make some sense? Well, Benjamin Durker, writing in The Federalist, proposes some reforms of the National Instant Criminal Background Check System that would make a difference. The system is composed of 3 databases, but not all relevant data is listed. For example, the Air Force failed to provide important information about the man who killed more than 24 people at the First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas. Legislation has been proposed to address this problem of inadequate records, but failed to pass in Congress. Another piece of legislation that has been proposed but not passed would increase criminal prosecutions of felons who tried to buy guns and would also criminalize straw purchases. The bill proposed by Senator Ted Cruz and Senator Charles Grassley would address the problem of people who lie on applications. Cruz says that in 2010 there were 48,000 felons and fugitives who lied and illegally tried to purchase guns. They prosecuted only 44 of them. David French writes about a way to deal with people who already have guns and pose a danger to society. It's called a gun violence restraining order. Various versions of these laws have been working their way through states, and it would empower family members and others close to a potential shooter to use the courts to temporarily take an individual's guns away. Obviously, it needs various safeguards. French shows how this law might have stopped at least 4 of the mass shootings in the last 4 years. We keep hearing that we need to do something. I think these types of common sense gun law reforms might actually prevent the next mass shooting. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right on Urban Family Talk.
Welcome back to the show, everybody. It's my pleasure to be with you. If I sound fired up about this, it's because I truly believe that in the absence of good government officials, in the absence of people doing what's right, who are paid to do what's right, we still have a responsibility to act and to be as much in the public eye as ourselves, not being anyone fake, not spreading out and turning into mini preachers all over the place, but just being ourselves out in our regular communities that can prevent so many of these things from coming to fruition. And that is where we are right now. If you can't trust the police department and the sheriff and the FBI and Homeland Security to do what they need to do, then it puts it back on you. The onus is back on you. It's not like we're completely powerless and we can't do anything. In fact, it's the opposite. The people closest to the problem are the ones who have the most ability to impact it. So that being said, it's my pleasure to welcome our next guest to the program. I've been such a huge reader of Ryan Anderson's work. He's a senior research fellow in American Principles and Public Policy at the Heritage Foundation. He's an author, a prolific debater, and the kind of person who you don't want to run up against him with some half facts and try to get away with anything, because he will set you straight, but always in such a nice, calm, laid back way. He never gets crazy with it, which is fantastic. It's my pleasure to welcome Ryan Anderson to the show. Ryan, thank you for coming on today.
Oh, sure thing. Happy to be with you.
I'm happy that you're still on the case when it comes to the issues that you have in this latest book of yours, When Harry Became Sally. Can you talk a little bit about why you wrote the book?
Oh, sure. A generation ago, when Harry met Sally, the big debate in that movie was whether or not men and women could be just friends. Today, in my book, the big debate is whether or not men can become women, whether girls can become boys. And what we're seeing are activists are promoting radical claims about the human person and radical medical interventions into the bodies of young people to transition them into the opposite sex. And we as concerned citizens, as parents, as family members, as friends, we need to know what the truth of the matter is so that we can respond in authentic love towards those who are in need.
So what does authentic love look like? Because I think some of us are so appalled and kind of, it's like a simmering low boil in rage. You know, you just are like, this can't be happening. I always feel like when I read these stories, Ryan, that I've woken up into like the Twilight Zone. only it's real. People are losing custody of their kids who are refusing to give them transgender hormones and surgeries, and all kinds of weird things are happening. How do we respond in love when we're so angry?
Sure. I mean, so the starting point is to understand what's going on and what the truth of the matter is. So sex reassignment isn't possible because our sex isn't assigned in the first place. So one of the starting points here is to recognize that the surgical manipulations to the body, they don't actually reassign sex. They might feminize a body, they might masculinize a body, but they don't change any of the underlying biological realities that make us a man or a woman. And so as a result, just as sex reassignment doesn't physically reassign sex, it normally doesn't provide the psychological wholeness and happiness that the patients are looking for. So many physicians, and I quote them throughout the book, they say that a much better therapeutic approach to gender dysphoria are therapies directed at the thoughts and at the feelings to help people, especially young people, feel comfortable in their own bodies, rather than trying to transform people's bodies into accordance with their thoughts and feelings.
Okay, so, and that, I happen to know that that works because I've read up on it, but how do I articulate if you know, it's a listener and they have someone in their family, which this has actually been something, Ryan, that I've bumped into quite a bit over the past year, is I'll meet someone who, you know, we're pretty much the same in every way, even politically, and they'll say, oh yeah, my niece or my nephew is currently battling with this. And so it's someone in their family, someone they see at the holidays and they know this child and they're like, oh my goodness, they're battling with this and I don't know what to say because the parents are feeling pressured. They want to go ahead and start the hormones. How do we talk to them? And because what you've just said makes total sense to me, but I don't have a child who's struggling with this.
Yeah. So a couple of things. So what we do know is that 80 to 95% of children with gender dysphoria will naturally grow out of it if they're given the time and the space to do so, if their development is not interfered with. So instead of giving your child puberty-blocking drugs, instead of giving your child cross-sex hormones, give your child the space to re-identify with their body. In the 6th chapter of the book, I go through a bunch of clinical case studies, examples of children who were treated for gender dysphoria. And let me just give you one of those examples. One involves a boy who was identifying as a girl. His family brought him to see a therapist, and they just engaged in talk therapy. They talked about, well, why do you think you're a girl? You know, what is it about being a boy that you think makes you not a boy? And they found out the boy was being bullied by the other boys in his class. They were picking on him. They were calling him a sissy. He wasn't the most stereotypically masculine youngster. So he formed friendships with the girls in his class. His interests were now more stereotypically feminine. And that's why he was identifying as a girl. It was a coping mechanism for his bullying. So the therapist suggested 3 things. Remove him from this toxic situation. Keep bringing him to me so we can talk about how real boys can be sensitive, real boys can be kind, real boys don't have to be jerks. And then third, find him a new play group, a new peer group. Find him other boys like him so that he can see that you can be a real boy and have all the same interests that he has, that he doesn't have to transition in order to feel comfortable about who he is. A year later, this kid was happy as a boy again. He was spared a lifetime of visits to the endocrinologist to receive estrogen therapy. He was spared surgery. Hopefully he'll be growing up to live a happy, healthy life.
Okay, so those are some fantastic, like those are the good stories. Those are the ones with the happy ending. And it didn't involve the parents really losing anything. We're talking about a couple of changes in who he plays with and some therapy, which most parents are willing to do that. It's never the case that the parents aren't willing to do anything. It's that they're not sure what to do and they're being led astray. So what about this idea that somehow all of us who are opposed to the gender reassignments and all of that we're afraid of transgendered people? Because I'm not afraid of anyone. I don't have a lot of fear going on. I don't want this to become the norm where, so children are confused. They're confused about a lot of things. Like when my kid is confused about other things, I don't give in to my kid. I teach them the truth. I unconfuse them by giving them facts. This is what we need to do with this issue. How do we beat back that whole, well, you're scared of transgenders thing?
Right. I mean, so what the other side is trying to do is they're trying to say that you have transphobia, right? And so you mentioned fear. They're using the word phobia, like homophobia, now transphobia, to say that if you don't agree with us, it's because you're afraid of us. And so many of the parents who you mentioned, they're just trying to do the right thing for their kids. But if they go to one of these gender clinics, or if their kids have a school counselor who's been influenced by these new gender ideologies, the advice they're likely to receive is that, oh, you should put your kid on puberty blockers, you should put your kid on cross-sex hormones. That's why I wrote this book. This book, I have a PhD, but I wrote it for normal people. Normal people can read this book and understand this book. You don't need to be an advanced scholar. And this is to be able to speak directly to the American people on what the truth is about this, and that it's not a matter of a phobia. It's a matter of a disagreement on how to respond to gender dysphoria. And I think we actually have a lot of science and medicine on our side in terms of what the best responses look like.
Okay, and that's totally true. And I think one thing that you just said there, Ryan, that's really important is for us regular folks to be able to discuss it, because most people don't have a PhD, especially not in this particular topic area. And it does feel kind of intimidating because the left has been very, very adept at finding some talking points, and they kind of shut you down with, well, you know, gender is what's between your ears, not what's between your knees. And they have these slogans and they have all this stuff. And we're kind of like, well, wait a minute. I kind of do think it's between, like, what do you appear to be? And they often bring up kids who have they're intersex, which is very rare. Like, this is not something that millions of people have going on. It's just very few. But they use the intersex kids as a way of saying all people who are suffering from gender dysphoria are simply just intersexed, and there is no cure for it. So stop trying to, you know, put your Bible stuff into it. Stop talking about Jesus. Stop talking about prayer. Stop acting like this can be fixed. It can't. They're intersex. It's some kind of aberration, and it's God's fault anyway. So yeah.
So what they're trying to do here is to throw as much dust into the air to make it as cloudy as possible so that we can't see clearly. We know there are disorders of sexual development, what some people refer to as an intersex condition. It used to be referred to as hermaphrodites. And these are normally actually fairly well-classified, documentable, either hormonal or chromosomal disorders that block sexual development or interfere with sexual development. But people who have a disorder of sexual development, the vast, vast, vast majority of them do not identify as transgender. And the vast, vast, vast majority of people who do identify as transgender do not have a disorder of sexual development. And so they're just trying to confuse issues. There is a reality that you could have a chromosomal disorder so that your body doesn't fully develop on a host of issues, a host of areas, one of which could be your sexual development. We know that chromosomal diseases can have these impacts. But we're talking about an otherwise healthy 5-year-old boy who's identifying as a girl, not because there's something wrong with his body, but because of an environmental factor, because of bullying at school, because of cognitive disabilities, because he has a very narrow understanding of what it means to be a boy, and he doesn't fit into that. Those are the things that we need to be engaged with and responding to. We need to be helping people see how there are other potential causes and therefore potential solutions to gender identity conflicts.
Okay, so is it so far gone that we've kind of lost the battle? And when I say the battle, I want to be clear. I don't feel like transgender kids or kids who have gender dysphoria are the enemy, but I think the public policy that's coming out of the desire to help these people is the enemy of, you know, pro-family people. It's the enemy of children, especially children who later will end up having gender dysphoria, and it's the enemy of parents. Have we lost, or is there a way to kind of incrementally take this ground back so that we can have common sense public policy on this?
Oh, we haven't lost at all. And this book is actually meant to equip and empower people to push back in precisely the way you're saying, because the distinction you draw is vitally important. There's a distinction between people who are suffering from gender dysphoria, people who identify as transgender, and those who promote gender ideology. Right? And our beef is with the activists who are promoting an ideology that harms people, that doesn't get human nature right, that spreads misinformation and lies about the human person and the human body. Ordinary Americans don't believe the transgender ideology. Ordinary Americans, if they're plumbers, if they're electricians, Uber drivers, waitresses, bartenders, they don't want their 5-year-old son coming home to say he's a girl. They don't want their 15-year-old girl coming home to say there's a boy in her locker room. But what we haven't succeeded is in being able to help people connect their gut intuitions with the best research, with the best thinking on these issues. That's what I'm trying to do in this book, and it's what we're doing right now with the listeners, right? We're trying to help them better understand what's going on here. So there's no reason to have despair that we somehow already lost.
Okay, perfect. And I think people need to hear that because it's very frustrating because, for every positive policy action like the president instructing the U.S. Department of Education to no longer take up these cases of transgender kids wanting access to, other bathrooms, there are people in states like the story that just came out last week of the parents losing custody of their child because they refused to do the transgender surgery. Now, I'm not sure if those people are in the U.S., but it portends for our future because we are kind of behind the more liberal, westernized countries, European nations, and even Canada on what we do with transgender public policy. So you're advocating for, and I don't know this, I haven't had a chance to read the book, but I will put the link in my Twitter feed for everyone and on the Facebook page so everyone can click the link. You can get the book from Amazon, quick delivery. It's awesome. What are we to do next if we have something like this going on in our kids' school? A transgender kid who's playing, living as the opposite sex, playing all the sports of the opposite sex in the locker room with our kid. What's the step for those people who they're already caught in the throes of it and they're not sure what to do?
Yeah, so the next step is to try to find a reasonable compromise. It's understandable why a high school boy who identifies as a girl feels uncomfortable in the boys' room. But it's also understandable why the girls feel uncomfortable having him in their room, right? And so can we create an accommodation for him, a single occupancy facility, access to the faculty facility, something like this, where he's not made to feel uncomfortable, but all the girls aren't made to feel uncomfortable. I think on all these issues, what we need to see is think about what happened with the redefinition of marriage. Once the underlying debate about what marriage is took place, then we now see all of the religious liberty disputes, and we now see whether or not you're even going to have freedom to live out your convictions about marriage. Something very similar will happen on these debates about gender identity and transgender identities. If the underlying reality of what it means to be a man and a woman is redefined, then we're going to see disputes for parental rights, parental authority, religious liberty rights, conscience rights. This will be for parents, for doctors. We'll see a whole realm of area where you can't simply live out the truth, whether it's in your medical practice or in how you raise your children. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you know what? I'm so glad for your expertise in this area and that you're still out there spreading the truth and doing the research and the hard stuff that PhDs do so us regular people can get the info and hopefully use it to make things better. Thank you, Ryan. Ryan Anderson, Senior Research Fellow in American Principles and Public Policy at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you for coming on today.
Sure thing. Thank you.
All right. That was pretty cool for me to get to interview him. So I want to encourage you to stay right there. We'll be back with more after this. I'll take some calls, 866-963-2037. Stacy on the right.
Stacy Washington.
And so to this day, I don't eat green beans. If they bring me a plate of food at a restaurant and they've substituted green beans for some other vegetable because the other vegetable is out of season, I will make them bring me a saucer and remove the green beans from my plate and take them off of the table because I cannot abide green beans. And so Chuck Schumer and the Democrats have to sit down to the table and it's loaded up high with green beans and they have to stay there until they've eaten them all. That's the table they set. They boiled the green beans, they picked them, they snapped them, they put them into the steamer, they've cooked them, they seasoned them with salt and pepper, and now they're on the table with a little side of butter, and that's all they're getting, and they're going to have to eat these until they win.
Stacy on the Right. Weekday afternoons at 2 Central on Urban Family Talk.
family is an institution set forth by God, one man and one woman for life, with the outflow being children produced by that union. It's obvious to all that there is an attack on the family in our country, and especially on fathers. Whether it's the cycle of sin that persists in our families or the pressure from our government to exclude men from being intimately involved, the strategic battle is on for the souls of men. Join us in the battle to strengthen fatherhood. UrbanFamilyTalk.com.
When I hear the president saying, you just have to respect the flag, well, you kind of don't.
Stacy Washington.
So I respect the symbols of this nation. I would never burn a flag. I do believe that they're not sacred, but they are important to us in our national identity. He could say, I feel like I have to respect it, or I feel like I don't respect people who don't respect it. But to say that you have to is not exactly accurate.
Stacy on the Right. Weekday afternoons at 2 Central on Urban Family Talk.
I'm not so certain we have as much time as many of us think. It's high time for the body of Christ to return with a fire lit up under us to proclaiming the truth of God's word, to proclaim the truth of sin and repentance, and not coming from a high, lofty position, but telling the truth as such were some of us. We have to do that. We have to. But what happens is, and I call this first world problems, we have this epidemic of churchianity in America, to where we are far more accepting and far more willing to embrace the trappings of church life, even if they're void of the presence and power and fire of Christ. And I would say to you, just as the Bible says, that we can have a form of godliness while simultaneously, at the exact same time, deny the very power of the gospel.
Tune in to the Hamilton Quarter, weekday afternoons at 5 Central on Urban Family Talk. Welcome back to Stacy on the Right.
My wife Karen and I met at CPAC in 2009. We're a CPAC couple. It was the year Rush Limbaugh spoke, made a little bit of history. We were somewhat lost as a group. We had just elected the first African American president, and that was a big deal. And that was a hill that we got over, and it was something that we were all proud of. And we weren't sure what to do. And a little bit of cynicism, what do? This is a terrible thing. We elected Mike Steele to be the RNC chair because he's a black guy. That was the wrong thing to do.
Okay. Welcome back to the show. You're listening to some audio from CPAC's Reagan dinner. So this is the big last night event, or second to the last night, because there are still things going on Saturday. So Friday evening, they had a huge dinner, thousands of people in attendance. It is the movers and shakers of the GOP, of the political right. And I was not there. We did not attend a CPAC because I have not yet figured out how to be in two places at the same time, thereby breaking the space-time continuum. Pretty sure God's not going to let me figure it out, because if I could, I would think I was bigger than anybody around this joint. So yeah, I was in Indianapolis. But this story has legs and it's making news. And the reason why it's making news is because of what Ian Walters just said there. Full disclosure, I know Ian. I think he's a really great guy. And so I was really surprised to hear him say this. And so people have now come to his defense. Well, he take it in context. There is no context by which you can take a person who is otherwise eminently qualified for a job and boil the fact that they got the job down to the fact that they have a permanent tan. And so the reason I'm discussing this on the air and, kind of taking a break from where we were just a moment ago with the transgender issues and Ryan T. Anderson, Dr. Anderson coming on the show. And even before that, when we were talking about the Broward County Sheriff's failure and dereliction of duty. And believe you me, we need to hold these people accountable. The only way government gets better is if people start getting arrested and frog marched off in handcuffs, prosecuted and sent off to prison for allowing people to die. You can't be allowed to retire after not going into a building where there's a shooting going on while you're wearing your police uniform. We have to hold these people accountable. But we'll get back to that. So the reason this story is so important is because I've heard this before. Oh, well, it must be so much easier for you because you're black and black people get all the scholarships. It must be so much easier for you to do so-and-so because you're black. And right now, everything's all about blacks. Black people are being elevated, white people are being pushed down. I'm sorry, what universe are you living in where that's the truth? That has never been the case. And it is not the case right now. People have even gone so far as to tell me, these are not hateful people. They think they're telling the truth. Well, now that Barack Obama is the president, you probably never get pulled over. Sorry, no, that's not the case. You probably have more privilege than I do now. I don't know. It depends on what situation you're talking about. I believe we all have a certain level of privilege because there are certain situations in which it's more beneficial to be tall than short, skinny than fat. That's almost always, American than German. I mean, we all have a little bit of privilege going on. What I'm saying is, in order for us to get along, in order for us to have better relationships, these kinds of statements have to be something that we have to shy away from them. The same way it would be wrong for me to say that a certain person got a certain job because they're white when the person is qualified to get the job. It's wrong for someone to say that Michael Steele, who I have serious policy disagreements with, I feel like he's far too moderate to be a leader in the Republican Party. But I can't take away from his qualifications. The man raised record amounts of money as RNC chair. And before that, he was the lieutenant governor of Maryland. He also has numerous conservative bona fides that extend far beyond anything I've ever done in politics. And so many others who are right now saying that he's just overly sensitive about race because the statement was made about him. So if you're white, if you're Hispanic, if you're black, how would you feel if something that you worked hard for and you actually received, as you felt, a merit-based promotion or job that you fought for and you won and you got the job, and then after you did the job, someone said, oh, you only got that because you're a woman. You only did that job because you're a man. It's insulting. And that's why I'm covering this on the air right now. So Michael Steele actually sparred with the head of CPAC, Matt Schlapp, another fine, upstanding person that I met him. He's a nice man. But in this interview, he kind of infuriated me a little bit because he tried to make it seem as if Michael Steele has a problem, that he's oversensitive about being black, when the reality is Ian Walters just said the only reason he was the head of the RNC after the election of Barack Obama is because Republicans needed a black man to be in charge of the party to counter the idea that they were racist because Democrats just elected a black man to the presidency. Are you kidding me? There were 6 rounds of voting. If the RNC wants a candidate, they don't allow 6 rounds of voting. They push it through in the first or second round. There are parliamentary procedures that permit that. I mean, it's easy to find out, especially after the fact. This happened back in 2010. It's easy to find out whether or not someone was, a diversity candidate, if you will. So let's listen to this. It's Michael Steele sparring with Matt Schlapp. They're on Sirius XM Patriot 125, I think. They're at CPAC and they're broadcasting from Radio Row. Michael Steele was in the back of the room when the speech was being made by Ian Walters at the podium. You can't hear it on the audio when he said it. When you just listened to that just now, you couldn't hear it, but audible gas went up around the tables in the room because people were so shocked that he said that. Michael Steele's in the back. So, of course, afterwards, then he goes and he does radio with Matt Schlapp and they talk about it. And that's what you're listening to in number 7.
That very much. And I think, my concern, and we were just talking about this, my concern about what was said last night at the dinner was how it reflects on this organization, which I've been a part for a long time. I've spoken at and have supported. But more broadly, what it says about the party that we've both been active in and involved in. And that concerns me. And I don't know what gave Ian, in his role as communications director, the comfort to think that he could go before this body and I'll put it direct, disrespect you as its chairman, disrespect the attendees. Did he somehow think that this was somehow going to be acceptable to say? And that to me is the frustration because, look, you and I, as you said, we've been in the wars together. I've known Matt and his family from the very beginning, and it ain't about any of that. It's about how we as Republicans, conservatives, fighting the same good fight, as you know, disagreeing at times along the way, can get others in the party beyond this seemingly reliance to go there, to put everything in a racial context, and to undermine the very efforts of leaders like yourself and myself in trying to expand this party and its reach into communities of color across the country.
And so he's right. He went on to say some other things, which we'll get into on tomorrow's program. But I had to play this audio and kind of give us an opportunity to think this thing through. We have a really, I hate to use the term diverse. We have an audience that's reflective of this country. So we have lots of different people from different backgrounds listening to the show. And you guys know how I feel about the constant reliance on race. But that being said, it doesn't mean that racism has been eradicated and people can't say things that are racially incendiary. It doesn't mean the person who makes the error in judgment to say something like that, even if it's something they believe, it doesn't mean they're a hardened racist, someone who would wear a KKK towel or anything like that. And no one is saying that about Ian Walters. The assertion here is not that Ian Walters is some kind of racist. He's actually a Filipino man. It doesn't prevent him from being a racist against black people, but I don't think he's a racist. I've spent a lot of time talking to him. He's actually a brilliant strategist, and he is like the ultimate in PR, which is not demonstrated by his comments here, obviously, because he's now become the story. But I have to say, if we get caught up and mired in, well, he's a racist or CPAC is racist, then we're missing the opportunity here to have a discussion and really understand it's not outside the pale for someone to be completely insulted, as Michael Steele is, by this comment. It would be insulting if it were made about you. Just change it around a little bit and imagine someone saying that about you to thousands of people in a room and denigrating your ability to do your work just because you're a woman or you're, Asian or you're black, whatever. You would not take kindly to that. And that is why Michael Steele has been so upset about this. I think the opportunity for us is to just kind of admit that, first of all, it's always a factor. So I'm not saying that Michael Steele's race wasn't a factor, but there was another black man running for the RNC chairmanship. It was Ken Blackwell. As you know, he is very accomplished. I mean, that man has done so many things in politics. Fantastic individual. And he was beat out by Michael Steele. And so was everybody else. There were a number of people who ran that year for the RNC chairmanship. So what are we saying? I believe it's a factor because every one of your characteristics is a factor in whether or not you get a job. So I believe that Michael Steele's race was a factor in him finally obtaining the job. 1%, 2%, 15%. I don't think it was the overarching factor, but it was a factor. Sometimes it's a factor if you're a woman and you get a position because they're looking for someone who, there are no women working on the team. They'd like to have a woman on the team. And so all other things being considered, everyone's pretty much equally qualified. And that is the case in the professional world. So often you're going to have a number of candidates who, when you add the totality of all their experience together, any one of them would do a good job. And then it's a judgment call. And then it can be that you want a woman or you want a man or you want someone who's, diverse in some other way, or you don't care about that. You just have a good feeling about one of them because that person had the EQ, emotional, quotient. Their intelligence, everybody had pretty much the same, but their emotional ability to kind of deal with you, and they were positive and they had attributes in their personality that you feel like would be great for the team. And that's why they were chosen. So all of these things play a role. But it's wrong for any of us to boil down the accomplishments of another person into one of their innate characteristics. She only got that job because she's a woman. She only has good this or that because she's a woman. He only has such and so because he's a white man. Michael Steele only got the chairmanship because he's black. Wrong on every one of those. Might have been a factor, but not the deciding factor, because most of the time when decisions are made where you're hiring someone and you're only looking at one aspect of what they bring to the table, that's a failed hire that you're setting up right there. Ask anyone who's in management. Everyone who's in management has had moments where they picked someone based on something that they thought in their gut was going to be great. And then they realized later, hindsight's 20/20, there were a host of other things that were present right there on the resume, right there in the interview, right there in their experience profile and their references that pointed to a problem, but they ignored those because they were focused on one issue, one characteristic that that person possessed. So this is a constant battle that people are fighting when they're trying to find candidates and actually fill positions, no matter what the role. And I just think it's really insulting for this to be the conversation. And it's distracting as well. Do you realize what kind of metrics we're looking at in the Black community after 8 years of the first Black president? And instead of the Republicans and people at the Conservative Political Action Conference talking about how Republican ideals can change the lives of people living in poverty situations, intelligent, smart people who need an opportunity, who need jobs, how Republican policies can work well in inner cities if given a chance. Instead of having that discussion, we're all talking about Michael Steele and how him being Black isn't the reason he was the RNC chairman back in 2010. Wow. You know, just stop for a second and think about what a huge and colossal waste of time and energy it is for us to have this as our focus. So, you know, I'm disappointed that Ian chose to utilize his time at the podium in this way. He's already called Michael Steele and apologized. You know, there's nothing more that can be done on that front. But this is a lesson that it's worth learning for all of us. Not castigating anybody, not you know, no, I don't think Ian Walters is a racist, but there is an opportunity here for us to learn. Don't make yourself the story. Don't be the story. You know, report the story or do your speech or whatever you're going to do, but don't become the story by making a comment like this. So I want to go through a little bit more. We have, oh gosh. So this was the last one that I had here. The liberal hosts of the ABC's The View opened their show today by talking about how awful the modern conservative movement was, bashing CPAC, calling the guests extremists, and saying that people who were once in the fringe are now the majority of the Republican Party. My response to that is Joy Behar thinks that normal Christian behavior, praying to Jesus Christ and believing that he hears you and speaks to you, is mental illness. But they're going to say CPAC is full of the fringe. Do they have room to talk? I don't think so. Find me online at stacyontheright.com, at stacyontheright on Twitter and Instagram, afr.net, urbanfamilytalk.com. Those are the websites for the radio side. Looking forward to seeing you all over the place online and back here on the air tomorrow at 2 p.m. Central. God bless.
The views and opinions expressed in this broadcast do not necessarily reflect those of Urban Family Talk, Urban Family Communications, or American Family Association.